Welcome to the Holy Post. A recent article explains how diversity, education, and geography are driving the political parties apart. These findings also help explain the widening gap among evangelicals. In the past, evangelicalism was primarily driven by academic institutions in the North, but now it's increasingly fueled by entertainment interests in the South. Phil explains this rise of what he calls Christian Nashville-ism. Then I talk with Bishop Claude Alexander about his new book, Necessary Christianity, and what he believes to be the most urgent issues facing the church in America today. All of that, plus more listener feedback about teen mental health research. Phil explains how puppies, infants, and Baby Yoda have hacked our brains, and an unexpected animal attack in Ohio. Before we jump into the episode, we have a brand new episode of Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess exclusively for our Holy Post supporters. This time she and I talk about the issue of communion and what does the Bible really say about who's allowed and who's not allowed to take the Lord's Supper. It's an interesting conversation that gets into some church history and interesting theological debates. If you want access to that kind of bonus material, plus the Holy Post Book Club, live streams, exclusive merchandise, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including bonus interviews with many of our guests, you need to go to holypost.com and click the Support Us button. For about what amounts to $1 per episode of Holy Post, you can be part of this wider community, engage with like-minded people, and have a whole bunch of bonus resources that you'll benefit from, as well as your community. So go check that out at holypost.com and click Support Us. Okay, here is episode 557.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I am here with Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Phil, how are you today?
I'm getting better, slowly. I was really sick over the weekend, so I was lying on the couch watching college basketball, saying,
well, at least there was a lot of basketball on for you to watch. You could just lay there and...
endless stream of basketball from like dawn till midnight. It's just one game after the other. There was women's, there was men's, there was a few Big Ten teams left, and then there weren't. And now there's only one Big Ten team left. And anyway, I'm not all that into college basketball. I prefer college football, but I needed something to watch. And you can get into it if it's two good teams and they're having a good game. Who else is here, Christian? Do you see anyone else here?
I do. I see Skye Jatani.
Hi,
Skye.
How are you?
I'm good.
That kind of made me feel like Romper Room for just a second.
Yeah.
I see Phil. I see Skye. Who else do I see in my magic mirror?
Yeah, that was fun. Do you remember Romper Room, Skye, or did you never watch Romper Room?
Oh my gosh, he's not old enough. Oh gosh.
I'm old. That says something.
Yeah, it's a good thing we don't have Caitlin here. She'd just have zero.
She'd really laugh.
Zero
Romper
clue.
Room.
Okay, with that, everyone who doesn't know what Romper Room is, go Google it now while I play the theme song. And now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, what's going on in the world? Well, what if I told you, maybe you heard about this, maybe you didn't, I don't know. What if I told you that a man in Ohio had his arm bitten off by a pet?
A pet what?
Was it a pet alligator?
That's a good question.
Because if it was a hamster, he
then
had
we'd
other
be in
issues.
trouble. Yeah.
Okay. I want you guys to try to guess, what is the pet that bit a man's arm off?
Cocaine bear.
Pet cocaine bear.
Yeah.
Christian.
He's going to hang around. I don't know if you heard me, but I said alligator.
Yeah, you said alligator. Yeah, that's they could do that. An alligator could bite your arm off. What else could bite your arm off that you might keep as a pet in Ohio? I don't know if you'd have a really big alligator in Ohio.
A tiger.
Okay. Maybe a tiger.
Anything could bite your arm off if it's given enough time. It could gnaw through that thing. I mean, a cat could do that. Like if he passed out somewhere and his arm was just there and looking really, really ripe.
You're just being
a small rodent could do that.
I'm not going to play your reindeer games, Skye Jatani.
I want to keep playing. Okay, so it wasn't
It's not
a lion.
an alligator. Not an alligator.
And
Not a lion.
Not a lion. Okay.
Is it a mammal?
Yes, it's a mammal.
Okay. Does it have sharp teeth?
Not really.
Huh.
Ew.
Oh, that was a bad experience, I'm imagining.
Sharp enough, but here's the kicker. It's not a carnivore.
Is it an alligator snapping turtle?
It's a mammal. He said it's a mammal.
It's a mammal, and
sorry.
those are carnivorous.
So it has to be some kind of
omnivores.
like a cow or an ox.
How about a monkey?
Ooh,
Monkeys have sharp teeth.
Yeah, they do have sharp teeth, and they're omnivores. So they're not. They're not. This is a herbivore.
A llama.
This is an herbivore?
Yeah. Arm bitten off by an herbivore.
A pig. It's a pig. How about a pig? A large pig.
That is a good guess, but it's wrong. All right. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to go on forever. Yeah.
How about a llama or an emu? Llama or an emu?
Emu is not a mammal.
That's not. It's a bird.
Really?
Birds lay eggs. Mammals don't lay eggs. So if you lay eggs, you're not a mammal. Okay, your eggs are.
I didn't
inside.
know emus laid eggs. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit challenged in the animal department.
Okay, so what is it, Phil?
A man in Ohio, 77-year-old man, his arm was bitten off by his pet zebra.
I would not have guessed a zebra. I thought they were like unicorns, happy and,
Oh, yeah. They are.
How do you know what a unicorn is?
Everybody knows unicorns are happy, Skye. Come on.
Well, it's just a horse with a horn.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, why does a man in Ohio have a zebra to begin with?
That's a good question. In Ohio, zebras are not considered exotic animals, so you do not have to get permission to have one. He had several zebras in a pen on his property, and a male zebra got very testy one day. They're not sure if he was like trying to fend the females, if someone was in heat, if that had something to do with that. Male zebra got very testy, attacked the man, bit his arm so severely that he actually lost it. But good news, they were able to reattach it. So
that is good news.
They put his arm back on. That just like those little Lego minifigs when you accidentally pop an arm off because your zebra bit it, you can put it back on. That's what we're turning into with advanced medical science. We're minifigs.
All right, here's my question. I don't know if the article gave you this much detail, but did the zebra actually completely sever the man's arm or just damage it severely where they had to amputate it and later they reattached it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, he bit it.
Like, I want to know if there was a zebra running around with a human arm in his mouth.
No. The zebra did not detach it, but he bit it mostly off, and they thought that he was going to lose it, and then they were able to reattach it. And they had to put down the zebra because when the sheriffs came to try to get the guy out of the yard, the zebra was attacking them, and they tried to use a police car to block the zebra from the guy. And the zebra was getting around the car and still trying to attack everyone. This zebra
was a
went nuts.
Rabid zebra.
They should have just put the zebra in jail because he already had the stripes.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That is good.
That's like community service. He could have been on the side of a highway picking up garbage or something.
Yeah. That's real good.
Well,
okay.
I'm happy that the story has a happy ending.
The story, not for the zebra.
Not the zebra.
No, that's true.
They had to put the zebra down. That zebra was not. He lost his composure. So zebras, it's okay. We can get along with you if you keep your stuff together. Keep it together, and we can peacefully coexist. But if you lose your stuff, if you lose it, it'll be a little bit bad for us, but it'll be a lot bad for you. See, because we have detachable and retachable arms. So reattachable arms.
I'm guessing we didn't get the whole story here.
Minifigs. I always give you the whole story.
No, I'm not saying you
give
didn't.
you the whole story.
I'm saying the man who got his arm bit off may not have told the whole story of what provoked the zebra.
The zebra just flipped. He just, it was like Michael Douglas in Falling Down. He just said, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. This is it. Actually, do you know what he realized? he realized that he lives in Ohio. Like, why the heck am I in Ohio?
Oh, you're going to get some bad fan mail now, especially
Wait a
from
minute.
JT Atkins, who does live in Ohio.
If you're a zebra, you don't want to live in Ohio.
They're not indigenous to Ohio. No, that is correct.
No, exactly. Thank you very much. All right. Next story.
But then again, neither are white people.
Next story. It says, hey, don't get me in trouble.
Wait a second. What? What? Huh. I don't think we should go back. I don't think we should go back. Go ahead, Phil. Just go forward with your next story.
Okay. I need to talk about something else. Is that okay if I talk about something else?
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about something that I think we all know very well, especially Skye. We need to talk about cuteness.
I think, of course.
I think everyone, when they think of Skye Jitani, they think, "Oh, he's so cute. I
love
cute.
cuteness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Today I watched a little puppy and a little duck, and the puppy was petting the duck and carrying it around in its mouth and then putting it down, and they were like best friends.
Is that what your mom told you, Christian?
No, I was watching that on
The puppy was just carrying the duck around in its mouth because he was friends?
Yes, I watched it on Instagram. It has to be true.
And the duckling was sleeping. Okay, what's the cutest thing you can think of right now? Puppies, kittens, your own child, or much more likely, Baby Yoda? Whatever you choose, be warned that adorable thing has hacked your brain. In fact, just glimpsing at something adorably cute will trigger an innate caregiving mechanism response, a neurological response that scientists believe has been sharpened across thousands of years of human evolution and or God.
Is that why I want a kitten so badly?
You betcha. Human beings basically have a response to what we call cuteness as we come to the world. Too early. We're not quite cooked when we show up. Most animals can immediately get up and walk around after birth. Humans can't. We need a lot of care and need to make sure our young are appealing enough to receive that care. They're using brain scanning techniques to try to figure out what happens when you see different faces. So there's a region of your brain that recognize faces. It is in the back of your brain. It is called the fusiform face area. And it's designed and or evolved to recognize faces. But when you look at babies, there's activity in your orbitofrontal cortex. In addition to your fusiform face area, your orbitofrontal cortex is an area strongly involved in emotions and pleasures, located just above your eyeballs. That's where it is. Your cute baby part is just above your eyeballs. In this way, cute babies essentially have a very quick and privileged way of entering our consciousness. They grab our attention so quickly that you are not yet conscious of it. After a 1/7 of a second of seeing a baby, you get this wave of brain activity that says, whoa, that's a baby. I need to care for it. They're wired.
That explains why we also kick teenagers out of our house.
Yeah, not cute anymore.
That's
cute.
Right.
Researchers have even developed a cuteness rating system, which we tried to develop that in middle school, me and some of my friends also. Ours was less successful. A cuteness rating system based on objective measurements, including the proportion of forehead to overall face, cheek chubbiness.
Oh, I'm winning that one.
I knew you were going to say that. I started laughing before anything came out of your mouth because I knew.
And how big your eyes are. So if you have a huge forehead, small face, if you have giant eyes, so basically it's just we're designing anime people.
Exactly.
Yes, and not only anime, but those little, you have one of those little dolls. What are those little dolls called?
Those
plastic
the Funko Pop guys.
Funko Pops. Yes.
Right.
It's it's Hello Kitty, it's Japanimation, Yeah, the Japanese have really figured this out, how to make something that immediately triggers the cuteness response. When you're an infant, you have a high cuteness rating, but this lowers as you get older and those facial proportions change. With age, suddenly facial features no longer grab us in the same way. It doesn't elicit the same selective response. But
as every child actor has found out.
Oh, is that true? Oh, I don't feel about you the way I once felt about you. But here, this is interesting.
Unless it's Jason Bateman. or like a Justin Timberlake. They're still cute.
Yeah, they didn't change much. They're like frozen place. You can use the same rating technique on animals, and what you discover is, on average, puppies and kittens score higher on this scale than babies. Puppies are cuter than babies.
Depends on the baby.
Wow.
It does well.
My children were exceptionally cute.
Okay, Skye, how many times have you looked at a puppy or a kitten and said, that is an ugly puppy or a kitten? Never. Maybe those
hairless
cats.
There's been a few.
Hairless cats, not so much.
That's it.
Yeah.
And
That's it. Just
sometimes
hairless
they
cats.
have like these ugly dog competitions, and every
those are
dog in the
puppies.
ugly.
The older they are, the uglier.
I am definitely a sucker for puppies. Like, I could just spend all day with puppies and be
Me too.
absolutely happy.
Also, on average, puppies and kittens they score higher than all people, including babies. But here's a theory. Animals, like dogs and cats, have been essentially bred, this is a theory they're promoting,
to be cute.
look like babies.
Yes, I think that's true.
To
They
look
have the
like
big
babies.
eyes, they have the big ears. When you see them, your brain is thinking, this could be a baby. And it's only later on, by the time you already have reacted, you say, oh, that's not a baby, but maybe I should still look after it anyway.
Well, no, I think what part of it is, I saw something recently about how they have domesticated foxes, I think maybe in Russia or some. And as they, over the generations, as they breed the wildness out of them, they start exhibiting visual qualities that make them cuter. Like they get bigger eyes, floppy ears, less pronounced snouts. So they just naturally acquire these more childish, cute characteristics with domestication. I think that probably happened to wolves when we domesticated them into dogs. And
look at the trajectory between a wolf and whatever it is, your favorite dog that you have now, is a whole lot cuter than a wolf. Wolves are good looking. I'm not going to say wolves are ugly. They're good looking. But I don't have a caretaking instinct that kicks in when I see a wolf. I have a runaway instinct. See, and if you saw your baby for the first time and you wanted to run away, that would be a problem for human survival. So
clearly,
babies,
yes, it would.
Babies need to be cute. They need to be cute, and they need to be cute until they can take care of themselves. So that's why the ugly kicks in at 17 and a half.
middle school.
Yeah,
or middle school.
You're like describing the difference between beauty and cuteness, because right, like I don't know.
Yeah, which one are you, Skye?
Oh, I am the perfect embodiment of both. Clearly, people look at me and they are both attracted to me and yet want to care for me at the same time.
It's his beautiful cuteness that makes me come back again and again to his devotion.
That's right.
Okay. I thought that was interesting, that there's actually a part of your brain that responds to cute and that you can scientifically kind of determine. So there was another thing that they wanted to test, which is the kind of the widespread belief that women find babies cuter than men do. And they came up with a way to test that. And what they discovered is, no, not true. Men and women find babies equally cute. Men do not want to admit it.
Interesting.
Yeah. They came up with a test where they could show you pictures and see your brain response and see how you responded to those. And no, the men did not respond any less to the cuteness than the women did. They're just
but they didn't go,
less.
Aw.
Yeah. They don't want to do that. We don't want to do that because then people will question our manliness.
I do wonder, though, if there's a difference between a mother's and a father's response to a newborn, like a really newborn baby, because some newborns, they're just kind of a mess. I don't mean like just gross. I mean like misshapen heads and bruising and all kinds of hair in weird places and whatever.
I think every newborn looks like Don Rickles. Every
That's a good comparison, Phil.
So I don't
Scary,
know
but
any
good.
mother that doesn't look at her newborn and just immediately attach, right, and feel care, instinct, and all those other things. Whereas, maybe a dad looks and goes, am I sure that's mine? Because I'm not sure.
Phone.
It's kind of ugly.
I heard
the bat phone just rang, and it was only one ring.
Why?
I thought I was going to have to like scramble. I have no clue.
What's that all about? Oh, okay. All right,
know.
moving right along, because I like to keep this show moving. It's good shows move along. They don't dawdle. They don't just hang out looking at cute baby puppy pictures. See, and that's why Baby Yoda is so darn cute. His forehead's huge. It's like
Big
your
eyes.
chin. This is interesting. The bigger your chin, think Jay Leno. Okay, like babies have tiny chins. So as you grow older, your chin gets bigger. You lose cuteness. So, no one has ever said, oh, Jay Leno is so cute. He's got a giant chin. But you can be manly.
That's true.
You can be like strong.
Yeah.
strong.
If you have a
like,
chiseled jaw.
Yeah, like Gaston. Think of Gaston. He's not cute.
Right.
He's beautiful.
I tell you what, though, every time Baby Yoda appears on the scene, particularly in Mandalorian, I am have this warm feeling of joy and happiness.
Yeah.
So he
That's why
definitely works on me.
They wanted a character that you would know you would want to take care of. I want to take care of the Baby Yoda. Give me the Baby Yoda.
The name is Grogu.
Yes,
I don't
Grogu,
care.
but-
I don't care what his name is. I'm going to rename him after I adopt him.
But your theory does not apply to Din Djarin, because why would Din Djarin feel so connected to him and want to take care of him if he's a big manly dude, which he clearly is?
Because he's cute. And that works on everybody, even big manly dudes.
Do you think
And
it's
he doesn't mind admitting it?
He hasn't admitted it yet. He's just doing it.
Do you think it's a coincidence that they gave him the name Grogu, which sounds a lot like Goo Goo, like the Goo Goo Gaga you would give to say to a baby?
I'm going to say.
I think they
I'm gonna say
probably
no.
consulted with psychiatrists and psychologists to come up with that name.
I think it's a terrible name. Why didn't
I do
mean,
too. I don't like
Wookiee.
the name. I like Baby Yoda a lot better.
Yeah, Wookiee. That's why
Did
no
you
one
hear
switches
him?
to Grogu. They just keep calling him Baby Yoda because Grogu's stupid.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Did you hear him last time in the last episode say
No,
this
I
is
haven't
the
watched
way?
him yet. I don't watch him yet. I haven't watched. Don't. What are you? He can't talk. He's Baby Yoda. I don't even know what you're talking. Okay, I'm moving on. We for 2 weeks in a row we talked about the mental health crisis among girls, and then later, is it more pronounced among liberal girls and conservative girls? And then we talked about the Jonathan Haidt's work on the topic and the articles that he's written and his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, or whatever it was, or The Coddling of America. Is that what it is?
Coddling of
America Mind.
Yeah.
Whatever. So, wait, where am I? I'm pulling something up to show you something. We got a lot of feedback on that. We keep getting a lot of feedback on that. And I don't want to keep talking about it because this has happened maybe 3 or 4 times in the last 10 years where we get so much feedback on something that we talk about it again, and then we get even more feedback, and so we talk about it again, and then we're kind of stuck in a loop like a mini series that we haven't even chosen for ourselves. Like we did it on modesty for a while, and then it just went off the rails. And I finally had to say, "No more! Not going to talk about this anymore." And we're approaching that level on the mental health crisis. But we got a lot of feedback. A lot of feedback was from people that are smarter than we are, who said that Haidt's methodology actually isn't very good, and here's why. So if you want to go to holypost.com and read some of the comments, there's some interesting comments kind of taking apart Jonathan Haidt's methodology and casting doubts on it. There's a critique of the limitations of the study or our analysis of the study. There's critique that correlation doesn't equal causation, which is, I think, something Jonathan Haidt had mentioned, that they felt they'd established causation, but
yeah, he wrote a whole nother piece on that, arguing why especially the social media.
But that was about social
Yeah.
media. That wasn't about whether it's liberal girls that have more
Correct.
mental health issues than conservative girls.
But they did link it to the fact that liberal girls spend more time on social media than any other demographic. So anyway,
That's true.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, and then there was some criticism that Skye and I are 2 straight white men, and we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to mental health of liberal girls. And
correction, we are 1.5.
Yeah, we are 1.5
straight white men.
Yeah, because Skye's
1/4 of us is not
Skye's
straight.
only half straight.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just leave that out there for woke preacher clips to pick up. Anywho, I am the first to say on most of the topics that I'm diving into, I'm over my head. I'm already over my head when I open my mouth because
I'm going to agree with you.
Thank you,
for that.
Christian. Thank you. Because we don't, this isn't a big team where we got like researchers doing research and writing reports for us. And then we review the reports and then we decide if we want to cover the story. This is me on Monday morning saying, what are we going to talk about today? And then I look up the stories I found interesting over the prior week and I read them and then we try to put something together. So could absolutely be wrong. The whole liberal girls have more mental health issues than conservative girls could be a complete fabrication of research read poorly. I'm completely open to that. And I'm also perfectly willing to stop talking about it. Christian, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I do think that we talk about stories that are interesting and primarily they catch your attention and you put them out there, or we share stories during the week and we think it's interesting. Not that we have the answers or the solutions to everything, but I think we talk about stories that are interesting to debate and discuss. And what I do love is that our listening audience will either talk to us about that on Twitter or on the website and correct us when we make mistakes or point out other things we should think about. And I applaud you for being willing to say, I don't know everything and sometimes I make mistakes, but I still think it's worth discussing and talking about.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Christian. I appreciate that. Skye, are you still there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I now can't see either of you because my internet's having trouble apparently. So I'm flying blind.
I can see everybody.
I'm flying blind.
I have two thoughts real quick. Number one, Jonathan Haidt was clear in his article that he said the real big takeaway from all of this data is that this entire generation of young people has skyrocketing rates of mental health problems. And that's really what we need to look at here, not just the fact that the rates appear to be highest or growing quickest among liberal girls, but that everyone is struggling. And as we talked about, I'm guessing that over time, some of those differences between the genders and political ideology will probably catch up with one another. So I don't want to lose the forest for the trees here and get too bogged down in just the whole liberal girl thing. But then secondly, I want to gently push back a little bit on something that comes up frequently in comments, and this is not just true of the Holy Post, but all over the place. Sometimes people will say, you can't talk about X unless you have a representative of X present when you talk about it. And I think it would be super helpful to have representatives of a group or an identity or an issue present. It would definitely flesh out a topic more, add more experienced, firsthand experience into that topic. But I don't think we should ever tell people you're not allowed to talk about something because you don't represent that. I mean, we just had a whole conversation about cute babies, and none of us are cute babies. And in this case, as much as I think teenage girls need to be heard and engaged around their struggles with mental health illness, I don't know too many 16-year-old girls that are actual experts on mental health. We need, adult women and adult men who are trained in mental health issues to talk about these things, not just the people themselves. And there are all kinds of problems and issues in the world that we can't just say you're not allowed to talk about because you're not one of them. And usually that argument comes forward when someone has said something we disagree with. If everything we had said people totally agreed with when it came to the mental health of teenage girls, they would not have said, you shouldn't talk on that because you're not one of them. It's when you disagree with somebody that you usually throw the card, you're not one of them, therefore you don't have any right to talk about it. So I think that just gets played way too much, and it's usually a bad faith defense against something you didn't like.
Okay. Send your letters to Skye Jitani at imsingleNow.com.
I just think people need to take us in context. I would encourage people to take us in context. And I do think we are bringing stories to the public square to have a conversation around them. Sometimes, Skye or Phil weighs in as a history expert or a, biblical expert or whatever, because you guys have knowledge and understanding in those categories. And there are other times, though, where we just talk about things we think need to be talked about in our public square. And I think sometimes maybe we step over that line a little bit, and maybe we do talk about things that we don't know 100%. But I do think people need to take our show in context.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that
and with
that-
a grain of salt. Make it in context and with a grain of salt.
Look who's talking, right? I mean, just look at who's talking.
no doubt a lot of our conversations would benefit from having a wider range of representatives in those conversations, but that doesn't mean you can't ever talk or offer anything about a topic because they're not there. So it's not an either or.
All right. They get it. Do you? Do you guys get it? I get it. They get it. Maybe they get it. Let's move on.
Well, I think they need to hear too. It's important that we admit when we are wrong, or
Yes.
we need to acknowledge that we're not experts. I think that's important too. And I think our listeners, are they listeners? Yes. Our listeners need to continue to weigh in when they disagree with us.
We're hosting a conversation.
I always may be wrong. 100% of the time, I may be wrong. And a certain amount of time, I'm probably right. But I don't know which it is. That's the thing. I don't know which it is. Okay, the 4 quadrants of American politics, why Congress doesn't work. I bet you've been asking yourselves, why doesn't Congress work?
Yes.
It seems like it should work, but it seems like it isn't working. What's that all about? Okay, this is an article in The Atlantic by Ronald Brownstein, went into depth on here's why Congress is no longer working. Control of the House of Representatives teeters precariously from one side to the other because each party has consolidated its dominance over mirror image demographic strongholds. Okay, let's unpack this. Democrats now hold, and I'm going to pull in, I have another story after this that pulls in how this is showing up in the evangelical world. So don't tune out if you're not interested in national politics. Stay with me until we get to the part where it affects the church, because we are going to get to that. Democrats now hold a commanding edge over the GOP in seats where the share of residents who are non-white, the share of white adults with a college degree, or both are higher than the national average. Okay, so if there's an area where non-white residents are higher than the national average, or where white adults have a college degree at a rate higher than the national average, those are overwhelmingly now Democratic voting areas. Republicans hold a lopsided lead in the districts where the share of racial minorities and whites with at least a 4-year college degree are lower than the national average. Now you ask, and an obvious question, why do we only care about whites with or without a college degree? Well, the answer is, as the researchers point out, because that's the only one that has a statistical significant difference, where you actually see a voting difference between whites without college degrees and whites with college degrees. Other non-whites, you don't see a difference in voting between not having a college degree and having a college degree. Okay, this demographic divide has produced a near partisan stalemate. The widening chasm between the characteristics of the districts held by each party has left the House not only closely divided, but also deeply divided. The party's intensifying separation is a recipe for polarization. So they did a study and they divided up American voting populace into 4 groups. Okay, would you like to hear the 4? It's the 4 quadrants of Congress, and they are high, low, high, and low. And that's all you need to know. That's the rest pretty much explains itself. No, okay, sorry. The 4 quadrants of Congress are districts with high levels of racial diversity and high levels of white education. Those are high districts. They are overwhelmingly Democratic today. Then there are districts with high levels of racial diversity but low levels of white education. Those are high-low districts, and they are Democratic, but just barely. Then there are districts with low levels of diversity and high levels of white education. So lots of white educated people and very few non-white people. Those lean Republican. And then there's the low districts, which are districts with low levels of diversity and low levels of education among whites. And those are now actually the biggest chunk of the Republican Party. So the GOP has become enormously dependent on one type of seat, the low district revolving around white voters without a college degree. Republicans hold 142 districts that are in that category, compared with just 21 for Democrats. The intense and this is where it gets interesting, the intense Republican reliance on this single type of mostly white blue-collar district explains why the energy in the party over recent years has shifted from the small government arguments that drove the GOP in the Reagan era toward the unremitting culture war focus pursued by Donald Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Many of the most militantly conservative House Republicans represent these low districts. Okay?
It's
Following?
also interesting that the design of our government in the Constitution gives a disproportionate representative power to rural districts. So the system is weighted to the low quadrant.
It is, but on the House side, because we're talking about the House.
Not on the House side, but in the government overall, the expression of people who live in those districts is outweighed by the others.
Yeah. So on the other side, the core of Democratic strength in the House is the high districts that combine elevated levels of both racial minorities and college-educated white folks. Democrats hold 98 of the 113 House seats in this category. So, and it's gotten worse. There used to be a lot more low districts that were Democratic, even up until 2009. And then the 2010 Tea Party landslide virtually eliminated all of those districts. After that election, the GOP edge in the low districts exploded to 90 seats and then reached a 125-seat advantage after gerrymandering in 2014. So in 2018, Democrats, powered by white-collar dislike toward Trump, swept away a long list of House Republicans who had held on to well-educated suburban districts. So there were more moderate Republicans that were in many suburban districts that were low diversity but high white education, and a lot of those got swept away in 2018 because of the distaste for Donald Trump. And so it's become even more.
We live.
It happened where we live. Our county had been red forever, and now it's blue. A suburban county with lots of highly educated white folks and not a ton of racial diversity. So the result is the Democratic Party is highly dependent on the high folks, basically urban educated whites and urban non-whites, and the GOP is heavily dependent on the low folks, which is less educated white people living in areas with very little diversity. And so those two agendas are driving the agenda. And it talks about the economic agenda. For example, each party is pushing an economic agenda that actually collides with the immediate economic interests of a large portion of its voters. Democrats hold 128 of the 198 House districts with high medium income, but the party has continued to advocate for redistributionist economic agenda that seeks higher taxes on upper income adults. Republicans, on the other hand, face more dissonance between their configured coalition and their agenda. Though the GOP holds 152 of 237 districts where median income is below the national average, the party continues to champion big cuts in domestic social programs that benefit low-income families, while pushing tax cuts that mostly flow toward the wealthy and corporations. So each of these seeming contradictions, this is a key point, underscores how cultural affinity has displaced economic interest as the most powerful glue binding each side's coalition. We're now about ideology and culture rather than economics or education or other issues. It's been split, and it's really, I'm part of this culture and we hate that culture, and they're part of this culture and we hate that culture.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, there are a lot of very educated, very rich people in the Democratic Party, and yet they vote for policies that hurt their economic interests. And there are a lot of less educated and poor people in the Republican Party who are voting for policies that hurt their economic interests. But they're doing it, both sides are doing it because each party corresponds with their cultural values, not their economic interests.
Yep. That's exactly it.
Okay.
So we've become...
and it's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Christian.
No, I was going to say, it's interesting in that scenario that you just painted, Skye, it is more damaging for the ones that are less educated and rural, for them to be working against their own interests.
Economic interests, yeah.
Economic interest, right? It's more damaging. And I think it's probably more challenging to realize that that's actually what they're doing. I don't think we have a very, across the board, it seems like we do care more about social issues than understanding either the economics or the actual policies that drive like what matters to us each day. And I do think that social media is driving all of those cultural conversations and understandings and not really educating our brains to those policies that affect us in our lives.
Sure.
Yeah. And the divide has become much more regional and much more educationally defined. Where you live and how much schooling you have kind of determines your worldview, the way you look at the world. And we're now seeing, the next story I want to cover talks about how that same thing is playing out within white evangelicalism and is creating a fragmentation that wasn't in evangelicalism 30 or 40 years ago. Daniel K. Williams is the author of the book, The Politics of the Cross. He recently spoke at Wheaton College and gave a lecture, and I've got kind of the outline of the lecture he gave. He talks about how evangelicalism historically for decades has been closely linked with politically conservative culture that was forged in the early years of the Cold War, strengthened during the Nixon presidency, and then solidified during the Reagan years. But a recent cultural divide between the two parties that has fallen largely along educational and regional lines has fractured this political culture. The overwhelming majority of white evangelicals still support the Republican Party, but those evangelicals no longer come from the suburban Sun Belt or evangelical educational institutions of the upper Midwest in the way that they did a generation ago. Instead, even as evangelicals from rural areas of the country, especially the rural South and parts of the rural Midwest, have increased their support for the Republican Party, the evangelical institutions associated with college-educated suburban Sun Belt and Midwestern evangelicalism have become increasingly uneasy with the GOP. And one of the things that Williams tries to point out is how different the Reagan voters of 1980 are from the Trump voters in 2016, even regionally, where in 1980, Ronald Reagan lost the state of West Virginia by 5 points and barely won the state of Tennessee. But in 2016, Trump won West Virginia by more than 40 points and Tennessee by 25 points, while Trump lost a whole host of states that Reagan won easily, including California, Oregon, Illinois, New Jersey, and most of the Northeast. So the Trump voters of 1916 are wildly different than the Reagan
2016.
voters. 2016.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, his voters in 1916 were even weirder because they were prophetic. In 2016 were wildly different than the Reagan voters of 1980. And what Williams is talking about basically is the difference between what I've described as Northern evangelicalism, is the evangelicals of Wheaton, Illinois, and Grand Rapids, Michigan, places like Fuller Seminary and Wheaton College and Gordon Conwell, that were kind of the intellectual driving force of evangelicalism from mid-century through about 2000. But now there are about 10 percentage points less of evangelicals come from that area, and about 20 percentage points more of self-described evangelicals come from the rural South. So evangelicalism has become more of a rural Southern movement overall, and thus, for a while, evangelicalism was picking up more and more of the political emphases of rural Southern life. And that's where Northern evangelicals and more suburban evangelicals started to become increasingly uncomfortable with what they were seeing in evangelicalism politically, particularly through the Trump years. So when people say, "What happened to my church? What happened to my evangelicalism? Where is it going?" One of the issues is that the people in the driver's seat are very, very different politically and culturally than they were 50 years ago. And it's something I want to talk about more because I've been feeling it but haven't articulated as well as Williams does in this story.
Is this just a case of something which is as old as time, that is, we are shaped way more by our cultural location than we are our theology or ideology. It's where we're located and the people around us that, in other words, the evangelicalism that existed in 1980 in the Reagan election was a reflection of not anything new in evangelicalism, but just the country. It's what the culture was. And the evangelicalism we see today is not a shift in evangelicalism or in its doctrine or teaching or theology. It's just a shift in the culture. And we always want to believe that our beliefs, our Christian beliefs dictate our political engagement, but is it really the opposite, that our cultural beliefs determine our political engagement, and then we pick the theology afterwards?
But it's not evangelicalism. It's not evangelicals being reshaped as much as it is evangelicalism being reshaped, because the people that are now, a big chunk of the evangelical movement 50 years ago probably wouldn't have called themselves evangelicals.
Okay. They would have called themselves fundamentalists.
Or Baptists, Southern Baptists. I mean, a lot of Southern Baptists said, we're not evangelicals, we're Baptists.
Right.
Especially
Or
rural, more fundamentalist Southern Baptists.
Exactly. Or they identified as fundamentalists like Jerry Falwell used to. And that term, that label fell out of favor because no one wants to identify as a fundamentalist. And they adapted or hijacked the evangelical label. And now the South, which was largely fundamentalist, calls itself evangelical. And so we've redefined the term.
So here's how.
Sorry, Christian.
Go ahead, Christian.
No, I mean, I was just going to say, it's interesting that you picked this story today because I actually experienced something this past weekend, and I put it on Twitter, and I was talking to my husband about it on the drive back because I was driving from southern Indiana all the way back up here to the northwest suburbs of Illinois, and there were guns, God, and Trump flags everywhere, or some sort of version of that, all throughout the rural areas where I drove. And I've seen that a lot in Indiana because my boys go to school there. And it really did get me wondering, why is this? Why in different regions of the country is there this, that's why we know red states, blue states, and I just wondered, why is this and how can we change it?
Yeah.
And are we going to the place where everybody moves to these people that are Republican are going to just move to the red states and people that are liberal are going to move to the blue ones? And then we have this dramatically divided country. What's going to happen, Phil?
Yeah, that's already happening to a certain extent. People are leaving California, moving to Tennessee, moving to Texas. Okay, here's how William summarizes some of this. And this is interesting because I've been trying to write an essay with a provocative title on something I've been thinking about for a long time. And Williams summarizes some of it here. He says, in 2018, only 17% of white Protestants who attended church at least monthly and identified their theology as fundamentalist or moderate lived in the Midwest, a decline of 10 percentage points over 4 decades. By contrast, 60% of Americans who claim a born-again experience, attend church at least once a month, and take a high view of biblical authority now live in the South. This means that any survey of evangelical political views is going to be a survey of predominantly Southern views. And if we restrict the survey to white evangelicals, which is often how evangelicals defined, it's going to reflect white Southern values, and especially the views of whites in rural areas. A multicultural, multi-ethnic evangelicalism is thriving in urban areas of both the South and the North, but much of that growth is leading to the expansion of Hispanic charismatic churches and non-denominational megachurches. Traditionally white denominations still remain, in many cases, mostly white, which means that the Southern Baptist Convention is facing increasing conservative pressures from white rural members who want to see the denomination take ever more extreme positions in the culture wars over race and gender. And hey, are we seeing that today? Yes, we sure are. We sure are, Williams. In response, college-educated evangelicals who traditionally identified more with the Midwestern college-educated evangelical culture of Christianity Today and Wheaton College have become increasingly alienated from what is happening among the majority of white evangelicals in other regions of the country. And some of them are beginning to abandon the evangelical label altogether. Have we seen that happening? Oh, yeah. Guess where I live? Wheaton, Illinois. Guess what I've seen a lot of? A lot of my friends don't want to be called evangelical anymore because they're watching what's going on. So I had this concept, and I'm trying to write an essay about it. But it's called The Rise of Christian Nashville-ism. Not Christian nationalism. That's a different thing. It's the rise of Christian Nashville-ism. It's what happens when the center of gravity for evangelical Christianity moves from the historic centers of Christian thought, like Wheaton, Illinois, and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and instead moves to Nashville, Tennessee, a center of Christian product and Christian entertainment. So when the center of gravity moves from centers of thought and academic pursuit to centers of product and cultural pursuit, it radically changes the flavor of evangelicalism in America. And when that new center of Christian, evangelical Christian gravity, Nashville, Illinois, also happens to be the headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention, it means the Southern Baptist Convention now has an outsized weight in what the world views as American evangelicalism. So I'm trying to write that story. It may show up in Religion News Service or somewhere, but I think the rise of Christian Nashville-ism is something that we need to be more aware of because it's radically changing. It changes the influence of Southern culture. Has like Cracker Barrel Christianity is more associated with evangelicalism now than Wheaton College Christianity. So it's such a big shift that we're not talking about, and so many people are frustrated but can't put their finger on what's happening, especially on Twitter. So many angry people on Christian Twitter are white, rural Christians, often from the South.
Can I add to your hypothesis, Phil?
Yes, Skye.
Because I think it's correct. But and we may have talked about this some years ago when an article came out. But when you look historically at what people immigrated and settled in the northern Midwest, it was a lot of Northern European immigrants, Scandinavians, Germans, Dutch, and Polish. And a lot of those people brought with them a cultural bias towards, when you look at those countries of origin, the Northern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, they're highly socialist because they came with a cultural value of collectivism. We need to care for one another. And you even see the residue of that in places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Northern Illinois, Michigan, where there is this attitude of the government, state, local, federal government should help one another, help us help one another to lift each other up. And that infected a lot of Northern evangelical theology and thought. Southern culture has been hyper-individualistic for a long, long time, to the point where it allowed slavery and it believed in states' rights and it's stay out of one another's business and I should be able to do what I want with my property. And that leads to
own my own guns.
From my cold dead hands, that culture is going to lead to a form of Christianity, of evangelicalism, which looks very different than the northern variety. And I think that's what you're seeing. So you can't just attribute this to strict theology. You got to look at the cultures from which their theology emerged. And northern, Midwestern, European theology is different than southern white segregationist theology. Even though that's not present now, the residue of both those things still exists.
But here's the thing. The Bible is the Bible. Why aren't we being defined by what the Bible says? It doesn't matter what example you just used. We're talking about the culture influencing our quote unquote theology.
Yes.
Yeah, there has never been a situation where someone could read the Bible without having the lens of their own culture in between them and what they were reading, because no one is not swimming in culture anywhere, ever.
Well, then why are we surprised by this article? To come full circle, I'm
just trying to
apparently the problem's always been there.
Yes, I'm just trying to identify. Yeah. But what happened from the 1960s through about 2000 was conservative Christians in the suburbs of the Sun Belt and in the suburbs of the upper Midwest were driving most of the train on evangelicalism. And that's changed now to more rural Southern Christians are getting more of the oxygen on the conversations about evangelicalism. So here's how, I just made this note after reading both these articles together, particularly how Democrats and Republicans now are just completely different groups of people and how it's splitting evangelicalism in half. And my summary was, for the foreseeable future, Democrats are going to portray Republicans as women-hating, LGBTQ-hating bigots. And Republicans are going to portray Democrats as baby-killing, child-mutilating demons. With much more of a demonic, you see that so much on the right, that this isn't just bad, this is demonic. And on the left, you see constantly, they're bigots. They're women-hating bigots, and they hate minorities, and they hate sexual minorities. Anyone who is in a minority, you hate them because you're a bigot. And as long as we live separately and don't interact, it's easy to keep demonizing the other side that way. And it's going to be that way for a while because that's not going to change. So the question isn't as much as how do we change that? The question is, how do we live in the middle of that? What do we do? How do we respond? Who do we not demonize? How do we, and not, because some people are accusing people of me of being like in the squishy middle. You're just in the middle. You don't want to take a side on anything. It's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about being left or right. It's being biblical. So take a side on what is biblical and recognize your own cultural bias, so get more. That's why I listen to black pastors, because they have a completely different cultural lens. It's not that they don't have a lens, it's just a completely different lens. And when I listen to their view, reading the Bible through their lens, and then compare it to my view, reading it through my lens, I'm going to get a fuller picture of how God's people read God's word. And I think that's really valuable. Okay, I'm done ranting.
I look forward to seeing your future piece on the rise of Christian Nashville-ism.
Yeah, I wrote the first draft. I need to go back, and I actually want to add some stuff to it just from reading these two articles. It's like, wow, good point. Ooh, that's a good point. Okay, y'all, thanks for coming along as always. It was great talking to you once again. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you want to be a Patreon supporter, you can help us out and get access to all sorts of exclusive content on Patreon and bonus interviews and such. We have more great interviews coming up on really interesting books that we're reading right now. And we can't wait to tell you about them. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. This is Phil. My wife Lisa and I got married very young, and we were a little bit immature. One of our parents gave us as a wedding gift a year of counseling, and the ability to sit down with a trained professional counselor was a huge help. Faithful Counseling is a Christian counseling service with more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, with access by video or phone sessions, or even chat and text, with expertise in depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, family conflicts, and more. It's more affordable than traditional counseling, and financial aid is available for those who qualify. We all need to talk to someone sometime, and Faithful Counseling can help. Continue growing into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holypost and get the professional, faith-based counseling that you need. They've even got a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holypost. Thanks again to Faithful Counseling for sponsoring this episode.
My guest today is my friend Bishop Claude Alexander Jr. He's the senior pastor of the Park Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he serves on the board of a lot of great institutions like Christianity Today, Mission America Coalition, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and Movement.org. He's also the chair of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Obviously, he has a lot of engagement and exposure to the broader American church, which is why his recent book is so helpful. It's called Necessary Christianity: What Jesus Shows We Must Be and Do. We chose this book to be part of the Holy Post Book Club at the end of 2022. I was hoping to get Bishop Alexander on the show earlier, but his travel schedule and commitments made that impossible. But I'm glad he's here now, because this book is really relevant for us and the challenges that we see in the American church today. Many of us are familiar that Jesus had a number of I am statements in the Gospels which highlight his divine identity. Bishop Alexander focuses on Jesus' I must statements in this book to help us get clarity about what we must focus on, both in our individual communion with God, in our commitments to the world, and collectively as the church. In our conversation today, we talk about what he sees to be the most urgent issues facing the church, as well as how he practices discernment in his own calling. Plus, he offers some wisdom about what the white evangelical church can learn from the historic black church, as well as what black Christians might learn from their brothers and sisters in white evangelicalism. It's a wide-ranging conversation, and I was delighted to have Bishop Alexander join us. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Bishop Claude Alexander, welcome to the Holy Post.
Hi, Skye. Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. I've wanted to have you on for quite a while. We have two of your books recently came out that we used in our Holy Post book club, Necessary Christian and Becoming the Church. So a lot of our Patreon supporters have already gotten those books. They've already engaged them. We wanted to get you on earlier, but you're here now. So let's jump off let's start with one of your books.
Okay.
Necessary Christian, What Jesus Shows We Must Do. What's intriguing about this for me is you write about in the book how a lot of times we focus on the I am statements that Jesus makes in the Gospels, often seen as declarations of his divinity. Yeah. John's Gospel has a lot of those, but you focus instead on his I must statements.
Right.
I must be about my Father's business. I must do this. I must do that. Why did you focus on those statements?
Well, it occurred over time. I try to make it a practice to read through the Bible in 1 year, each year using different translations. And in the course of time, you start to see these patterns. And so in seeing that, wow, I mean, there is intentionality in the gospel writers including these statements about must, necessity, obligation, call and claim. And they started to scream, pay attention to me. And I started paying attention. And thus the book became a reality.
And you draw out quite a bit in there how the I must statements stand in contrast to the popular values of our culture, which are very much around choice and autonomy and freedom defined in a modern American sense. You've been a local pastor for decades, so your writing is coming out of your experience with pastoring people in a context. How did that inform these subjects and the emphasis of the book?
Well, the modern sensibility about the claims of Christ on one's life seem to be that they are good suggestions. They are optional. They are to be negotiated. They can be compromised. And yet that is not how Jesus lived his life. And if we are to pattern ourselves after how he lived his life, then we have to come to terms with the fact that the claims of God upon us are not optional. They are obligatory. And regardless of how long we try to negotiate, those claims remain the same.
So let's get a little bit more personal. We've interacted quite a bit over the years in different settings, but I don't think I've ever heard the story about how you came to clarity about what you must do. When did you get that sense of, I'm obligated to follow Christ and go into pastoral ministry? What did that look like? What did that calling, how did it come to you?
So that calling came to me initially through a period of wrestling as a teenager during high school. I grew up in the home of physicians, and so medicine was the preferred route. That was my summer jobs.
Yeah, you and I have that in common, actually.
There we go. My mom a psychiatrist, my dad a general practitioner. That was what was expected. And yet there was this growing sense that gained weight and volume that I could not ignore and refuse. So that's the first example. The second example came later in the year 2000 when I wanted to run for mayor of Charlotte. And I had significant backing. And I asked the church to join me in a time of prayer. And in the course of that time of prayer, the Lord just gave me 4 words. Charlotte is too small. That was it. That was it. And this was before a lot of the things that you and I have been involved in. And I had to yield to that claim, even though the running was something that I wanted to do. I had passion, I had support, but the claim of the Lord said, no, not so.
And how did you discern that? I mean, I interact with quite a few young people over the years who are wrestling with, well, should I go into ministry? Should I follow a sense of calling into missions or ministry, whatever it might be? And in some cases, as I've walked alongside them, they've come to the realization that that's rooted in an upbringing, in an environment that said ministry matters more than anything else. And there's this subtle sense of, well, if I want to be significant, then I need to go into ministry. But so whether it was when you were a teenager or later in 2000 when you were debating about a political direction, how did you in yourself know what is God calling me to do? What must I do in obedience to Christ? And what is myself, or what is my own insecurity, ambition, good or poor motive? I mean, we're such a tangled mess. How do you do that discernment?
So for me, there are basically around 4 steps. 1, is it a continuation of what the Lord has been doing in my life up to that point? That's number 1. So as a kid, I was put in medical, scientific environments, but my mother also put me in arenas where the Lord could get a hold of me. So church, Sunday school, youth activities, right? And so there were these things that the Lord had opportunity and access, to speak to. And therefore, this notion of ministry was not a diversion from those things. It was an amplification and extension. So is it a continuation? Second, does the consideration of it elicit a sense of joy within you? Does it elicit a sense of joy? Thirdly, does the yielding to it give you a sense of peace? Does the yielding to it give you a sense of peace? And then lastly, is it good and perfect? And by good and perfect, I mean not only beneficial, but does it have within it what is necessary to be experienced as God intends? So those have been the 4 questions that I have developed over time in terms of discerning paths that God has for me. And sometimes they are very, very clear, and sometimes you just have to walk through them until they become clear.
Yeah, that's one thing that stands out about the discussion in your book around these statements that Jesus has around I must do, and then, he has these different things he does, but it's not like that's 100% of the time, right? He knows he must go to Jerusalem. He knows as a boy, I must be about my Father's business in the temple. But there's a lot where it feels a little bit like Jesus is improvising this whole thing, like in his interactions with different people and, who he encounters. And yet he's always in deep communion with the Father, and he does what he sees the Father doing. But there's clarity around certain pieces, and the rest of it is, well, Augustine said, love the Lord your God and then do what you want. That gets abused a lot, but that seems to be the gist of it.
Yeah.
Let me turn a corner a little bit. You mentioned, I didn't know about your debating running for mayor of Charlotte back in 2000, but I'm not honestly surprised to hear that because you've really established deep commitments in that community and you've been there for decades as a pastor, but you've also engaged in the wider church. And this is where you and I have interacted quite a bit in different settings. Gordon Conwell, Christianity Today, CCCU, InterVarsity, a bunch of other stuff on your bio that you've been a part of. When you look at where the church in America is at today, what do you believe we must do as the church in America that maybe we're not doing? What's a must that is a necessary part of our Christianity at this time in this place where we need to hear that call afresh?
Wow. One, I think we must be able to get to what is the core of our faith that unifies us, that we have in common, and that is our each having been called by God to himself, and through that, we're also called to each other. This is a fundamental thing that I think we must realize, that our calling in Christ calls us to each other. The reason why that is important is that it is that calling to Christ that calls us to each other that should give us the impetus towards leaning in towards each other in some fundamental ways. That's number one. The second thing that I think that we must do is recognize the claim to the kingdom of God as being primary to all things, and that everything else is judged by, critiqued, subsumed by the claims of the kingdom of God. So that deals with nation, that deals with ethnicity, that deals with the kingdom of God is over all of that. And any lifting of any one of those things above the kingdom is idolatry. I think the third thing that we must do that Jesus had a sense of is the urgency of the time. The urgency of the time. So I'll give you just one sense of urgency for me. This is now 2023. In 10 years, we will be at 2033. Why is that important? Well, that would be the 2000th year of Pentecost. That would be the 2000th year of, quote unquote, the birth of the church. We are 10 years away from a significant moment that calls for us to do some serious reflection and perhaps make some serious adjustments. So those are the things that immediately come to mind.
At one point in the book, you talk about feeling your age a little bit, recognizing that there are probably more years behind you than ahead of you.
Yeah.
Not an uncommon sort of midlife crisis kind of moment where you take evaluation of things and when you realize that increasing sense of urgency, that we all have limited time to do what God is calling us to do in the world. How do you balance that sense of urgency, whether individually or corporately as the church, and yet not carry an unnecessary burden where we aren't trusting the Lord with his initiative in accomplishing what he will do. So I don't know if balance is the right word, but I don't want to take away that sense of urgency, but I don't want to make an idol out of our own effort at
Absolutely.
the same time.
So I think, Jesus says, I must works of him that sent me while it is day, for night cometh when no one can work. And then he says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Okay. So there is this sense of urgency. I must work the works of him that sent me. Okay. But then he says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And so therein is the balance. For however long I have, right? I must seek to be who I'm called to be. I must seek to pursue what I understand God calling me to pursue, never knowing how long that is. The issue is not how long or how short. The issue is, am I being and am I pursuing what I understand myself to be and to pursue in a given moment, in a given time?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think what I see in the Gospels is that Jesus was single-mindedly, as you put it, focused on his commitment to do the will of the Father and his faithfulness to obey the Father, but he wasn't fixated on the measurable outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I get off track, is I want to fixate on how big an impact am I having, or how many people am I reaching, or how many parts of the world am I impacting and changing, rather than asking the question, how faithful am I being to what God has called me to do, and releasing the outcomes of that then to his care.
Yeah. Pete Scazzaro in one of his books, in his latest book, I believe, Emotionally Healthy Leadership, he talks about this notion of how circumscribed Jesus's impact was. I mean, it was within a limited geographical region.
Very, yeah.
Right? A very limited geographical region. A number of people, right? Not Billy Graham numbers, right? But that wasn't his thing, as you noted. His thing was doing the will of the one who sent me, following what the Father showed him, and leaving, as you say, the outcome, the results, to the Father. And perhaps in one way, when he says to his disciples, greater things than this shall you do, he was hinting at the fact that the further reach is yours.
Right. Yeah. Which gets carried out in your book, Becoming the Church, in your exploration of Acts. And I just wrote something recently about what did Jesus really mean by that you will do greater works than these. And in some circles, especially in more charismatic circles, we assume that the greater works means more spectacular, right? We're going to be raising the dead and walking on water and calming storms and all that. And I unpersuaded by that interpretation. I think your view is very much the one Jesus had in mind, which greater meant greater in magnitude, greater in number. And right from within the 2 chapters of Acts, you see the apostles and the early disciples reaching more people in Jerusalem than Jesus ever did.
Yeah.
And that gets, by the end of their generation, the gospel had been preached from Spain to India, whereas Jesus only ever moved within a tiny geographic region smaller than New Jersey, I think. So the church has done greater works because the Spirit has come and filled us and carried us forward. Okay, toward that end, speaking of the wider church, one of the things I really value about your role and our interactions is that you are a bridge, Claude. You stand as a bridge between your involvement in the African-American church and your network with a lot of African-American church leaders, and yet you've kept a foot in the broader evangelical context of America, and you engage with a lot of people outside the Black church, and you're a translator and a bridge between these two communities in some ways. So let's go one way across the bridge first.
Okay.
What would you love to see the white evangelical church in America learn from the black church in America? What wisdom does the black church have for the rest of the church in America that we may not be listening to but desperately need to?
Perhaps the most important for the time in which we currently live is what it means to be faithful on the margin. How to live faithfully and powerfully when you are not at the center of power, but when you are on the margin. That I think is probably the most important thing for the white evangelical church to learn, because there is this desire to reclaim the space and place of the 1950s. That's gone. That's not coming back. As a matter of fact, if we believe Scripture, it can't come back, right? So we have to learn what it means to be a people who speaks with power and authority and lives faithfully on the periphery with God as its center. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'm reminded of Dietrich Bonhoeffer when he came to the United States and he was looking at the more mainline church in America and found it to be not very helpful. But then he was drawn to black churches in New York City, Harlem, and other places, and realized this is a community that has lived faithfully on the margin, to use your language, for generations and has figured out how to do that. And he brought that perspective back to the confessing church in Germany that was very much on the periphery. And he said, there's the wisdom of the American church. It's to be found there. And that was 70, 80 years ago. Yeah. And we still need that today. Okay, let's go the other direction across the bridge. Based on your interactions in predominantly white evangelical sectors, is there any wisdom or hard-earned knowledge there that you would like to see more inculcated in the black church in America right now?
Sure. So one is the commitment to the globe. The locating itself outside of the narrow confines of community locally, but seeing itself globally engaged. That would be one. And the second would be the ability to steward relationships that create a greater level of generosity for the fulfillment of the mission task. Those two things immediately come to mind.
Yeah, and they go together very much. What gives you hope right now? Are you seeing more collaboration between these historically divided sectors of the American church? And if so, where do you see that?
I'm seeing them in various city movements that are happening in major cities. So movement.org is one example of where that is happening. It's not the only place, but it's one of the ways in which that is going on. The Palau Association is doing some things as well. So these abilities to bring together the big C in a collaborative effort to serve the cities, and in that common space and call, beginning to discern their call to each other. That's where the hope is. It has to be. It cannot simply be this call to the city. No, it's the call to the city and the call to each other. They go hand in hand.
So there's usually a cost to doing that. There's a section of people in any community that are very comfortable as they are where they are. They don't want to have the discomfort of engaging and being committed to the other.
Yep.
One of the themes that's come up quite a bit on our show over the years has been the reluctance of pastors in particular to say things, to teach things, to champion things that are going to not go over well with their congregations. Whether that's silence in the face of political idolatry. We recently had Scott McKnight on to talk about his new book on Revelation, and he mentioned how so many pastors agree with the point of view that he offers in his book, but they don't ever talk about Revelation anymore because their people are so formed by popular Christian media that this would contradict it and create problems. In your book, you talk about Jesus moving with clarity and direction and focus and his mindset about doing the Father's will, even when everyone around him is telling him something else. Even his own disciples are saying, you don't have to go to the cross.
Yeah.
How did you, over the course of your pastoral ministry, how did you cultivate the courage and the faith to say things that you knew your people were going to have a hard time receiving and call out some of those idolatries you mentioned? You talked earlier about putting the kingdom of God ahead of everything else. And when we don't, that's idolatry. Pastorally speaking, where do you find the courage to call those things out when all the incentives are just to keep your mouth shut?
Yeah, that's well, it's coming to terms with two important things: discipleship and stewardship. When we look at the development of those 12, and who ended up being 11 of the 12, there was formation in their life together, and we cannot ignore the significance of the filling of the Holy Spirit that then gave them boldness and courage. And so a part of this is the work of the Spirit in one's life. So that's number one. The second piece is the realization that our voices are stewards, are stewardships. They are trusts. God trusts us with the use of our voice. And there comes a time when there is the test of how far God can trust us with the voice that he gives us. And so in those moments where there is the difficult message, I've come to realize this is a stewardship matter. God wants to know, can he trust me with my voice for this word for him to speak? And at that point, the steward, the only thing that the steward is going to be judged on is faithfulness. Not impact, not success, but faithfulness.
It sounds a little bit like, to change the word from stewardship, it sounds like what you're describing is a very healthy fear of God. Stewardship is a more palatable way of saying it, but it's a healthy fear of God. Like, I'm accountable and responsible for this thing.
Yes.
And my faithfulness is what's going to matter here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we go, can just in recent months, or what's on your mind right now, what's an area where you feel particularly the weight of that stewardship of your voice with your own congregation or the other places where you have a seat at the table and an influence? What do you think in this next season of your life is going to be a critical part of what you are called by God to say and do that might be challenging and difficult?
One, I think that it will be the matter of the urgency of the time. That and the urgency is not simply a matter of limitation of time. No, the urgency is also the things that are happening within the time. I never imagined that there would be a time when we would be debating truth. Just truth. Just that. And that we would, in some ways, sanction lawlessness. No boundaries. All bets are off. These are, and globally we are seeing a xenophobia that is being demonstrated. It's not just America. There was a spirit of the time which we've got to be able to name, critique, and offer a different word and picture. And I feel that urgently. Simultaneously with that, God is doing some amazing things globally. I mean, I just came back from Dubai for Movement Day Middle East. 1,200 believers from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa came together for this time of shared worship, encouragement, collaboration. There's some powerful things that God is doing, parallel with what we're also seeing occurring in this spirit realm. And so the hope is seeing what God is doing. The burden is recognizing the spirit that is at work in the world and how we need to respond to it.
Amen to that. Claude, thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship and the interactions we've had. I always feel like I'm coming away more challenged and a tiny bit wiser when we have these conversations. To remind everybody, your two latest books are Necessary Christianity, What Jesus Shows We Must Be and Do, and then Becoming the Church, God's People in Purpose and Power. The Necessary Christianity book really focuses on those statements, those must statements from the Gospels, and the Becoming the Church book is an exploration of the book of Acts, both incredibly timely for this moment and grateful, like I said, for your voice in this moment as well. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.